Good morning, friends. Steve from Southern Illinois. And it's obviously cold down here. We are well into the cold mud stage of the year. And yeah, so let's get right into this. Vivian and I were in the final countdown to our wedding. Okay, she was in Michigan going to college, and I was in Nebraska going to college. And we'd all heard these horror stories about marriage. So she signed up for a class at college on marriage. And as a part of that, there was a weekend seminar called Engagement Enrichment. And she signed me up for it. And being a sensitive man of the 70s, I agreed to come and spend an entire weekend talking about marriage. And they had all kinds of topics lined up for us. We did a lot of writing as well as talking. We would separate and we would write out our thoughts on the topic, and then we would get together as couples and we would share, and then we would get together in small breakout groups and we would share. And there were a few lectures, but not very many. And we talked about things like finances and child rearing, sex, and fighting. And that just really didn't sit well with me. You know, I was an intelligent, confident college student. I had the world by the tail, and I knew that fighting was not a healthy part of a relationship. I mean, we had enough experience, as Vivian and I, of watching couples break up to know that when couples started fighting, there was trouble in store downstream. And so for them to have us talk about how to fight in marriage, it just did not compute. Okay? Nevertheless, they gave us an assignment of choosing a topic that we disagreed on, and we had to go apart and write out about our thoughts and our feelings, and then get together and start sharing our thoughts and feelings with each other. And Vivian and I looked at each other, and it was like, do we disagree on anything? Is there anything that we would fight about? Well, while we were kind of stumbling our way through the exercise, on the other side of the room, things started to heat up. A particular couple, they were friends of Vivian's, and they were, they had been just like us, stars in their eyes and all lovey-dovey, and voices started rising, and you could tell that something was going on. And then all of a sudden, the guy stands up and he lets loose a string of profanity, and he says, "I don't know what's the big deal about this. Why can't you just let me have my way?" And he stomps out of the room. She bursts into tears. Several girlfriends come rushing over to comfort her and to try to help and find out what's going on. And pretty soon she leaves him in embarrassment. And let me tell you, that kind of got my attention. This was a couple that looked like us, and Vivian was sure that they were, just right for each other, and yet here they were fighting. And the next morning, the facilitator for the group informed us that couple had withdrawn from the seminar, dropped out of the college class, and called off their engagement. And he emphasized, this is why you need to learn how to fight fairly, or you are going to damage your relationships. Wow. I mean, that got my attention. Maybe there was something to this learning how to fight fair. But I thought that all was fair in love and war. If you love somebody, well, loving somebody is never having to say, I'm sorry, right? Let me ask you a question. Does God fight fair? You know, in international relationships, there's this thing called just war tradition, the tradition of a just war. And it comes up in various ways in the media. Okay, just this week, my son came home to visit, and Eric brought with him a newspaper. And you would have thought I was an old rustic. I just grabbed that newspaper and I consumed it. Okay, but what intrigued me, what got me reading, was the headlines. Okay, now the Washington Post has both domestic and foreign policy headlines on each issue, and the foreign policy headlines were, Biden warns Putin over the Ukraine. Okay, the U.S. and Russia are at each other's throats about whether Russia is going to invade the Ukraine, and that's not a just war. He's invading. Well, you read on down through the article and you find out that NATO has put weapons in the Ukraine that allow them to fire missiles directly on Moscow. So this is just the Cuban Missile Crisis all over again in reverse. Just war. What is fair? Russia's feeling threatened, so they're massing troops at the border. But America is saying, thou shalt not invade. That's a war of aggression. You cannot do that. And then there was an article on the proliferation of drones in the Middle East and their use in terror attacks. Taking a drone with explosives and using it to blow up someone's car. Well, that just war theory comes into that too, because in just war theory there are three elements to the tradition. One, justice before the war. Okay, and that requires that only a head of state can declare war. Terrorism, by definition, is not a declared war, and the head of state is not leading it. So, ergo, it is unjust war. The United States, we still remember with horror the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attacked without declaring war. Unjust war. The United Nations condemned the U.S. attack on Grenada back in the, the 80s, because we didn't declare war. It was a surprise attack. Okay, so just war, the tradition of just war, comes up repeatedly in history and in our in the media, because fairness in war is an important aspect in our minds. We don't want to be attacked unfairly. But there's the second element of the tradition of just war is justice in war. Weapons of mass destruction come up in that. Okay? These are weapons that are uncontrollable. They don't discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. They kill everybody. Bioweapons, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons. Unfair war. Okay? But there's a third element, and that's really the touchstone today, and that's justice after the war. You see, in the tradition of just war, it's not really about warfare. It's about conducting warfare in a way that allows peace to be restored. If you do things before the war that create ill will, lasting ill will, peace can never be restored. If during the war you commit crimes, war criminals, that create lasting ill will, peace cannot be restored. And if after the war has been concluded you do things that prevent peace from being restored, you have not fought fairly. Does God fight fair? The Bible presents a war beginning in heaven between God and the dragon, between God and Satan. And Satan loses the war. He gets cast out. He gets cast down to the earth. And he's angry, and he goes to war with God's people here on earth. Does God fight fair? There are things that God won't do in that war. He won't lie to us. Okay? For Satan, it's a no-holds-barred war. But for God, he still practices ethical warfare. Why? Well, when Vivian and I were talking about this week, okay, we started out talking about our experience at the engagement seminar. And I told her how startling it had been to me when they talked about fighting fair. And, how everybody that we saw who was fighting ended up breaking up. And she said, well, maybe we need another word for it. What's another word for fighting? Well, fighting usually starts because somebody either feels threatened or hurt. And when we are fighting, for that period of time, we are declaring the other person the enemy. They hurt us or they are threatening us, and we are fighting to protect ourselves or to dominate them. What if, instead of fighting, instead of going to war, we were trying to restore peace? What if, instead of being on the other side and fighting back and forth, we were both on the same side trying to resolve, do away with the pain, trying to fix things, trying to problem solve? What if we were allies against a common enemy instead of enemies ourselves? Does God fight fairly? Is he at war with us? Or is he really our ally? That kind of changed the perspective on fighting fairly for me. I still don't like the words. I still don't think that you can put limits on fights in marriage and therefore not have them being harmful to your relationship. Over the years, Vivian and I have fought. And we have never had a fight that didn't leave pain, wounds. And those wounds either fester because they're not tended to, or they develop scars and create parts of our marriage that are not alive. It takes a lot to restore peace, and fighting never does that. Conflict does happen in relationships. Does God fight fair? You know, sometimes we say really horrible things about God. And I think one of the most horrible things we say about him is that if you lose in a fight with God, he's going to torture you for eternity. That is the epitome of not fighting fairly. If after World War II we had set up torture camps for Nazi war criminals, and today we were still torturing them in those camps, their screams were still resounding through the hallways, would you say that we had been promoting peace? No. The families of those men would be so angry and bitter. And yet we paint a picture of God where he tortures people for eternity, and we call him loving. Now, I've told you before that I don't believe in hell. I believe in eternal destruction, not eternal torture. Because for me, God is a God of fairness. And while he does punish wrongdoing, he does so proportional to the wrongdoing. His punishments are proportional. They are not unfair. As I've been thinking about this week, okay, I realize that even that is kind of a perversion of who God is. You see, I really have thought of God as being at war with me. And I have to let him win. I have to surrender. And this week I realized he was never at war with me. His heart was never at war with me. I was never his enemy. I have always been his child. And he has always been on my side. And it's not so much a question of whether I surrender to him as to whether I let him be my ally in my battle against temptation, against sin, against the evil in this world. Be safe, my friends. Be prudent. But above all, keep looking up. I hope to see you next week, and I would really like some sunshine. Bye-bye.